This is part 5 where I'm going to be covering working with gel wax and how to make 2 different types of gel candles. So first up, before we get into working with it, we need to know a little bit about this product. So gel wax technically is not a wax, it's actually mineral oil and a polymer resin together. So even though it is called gel wax because it is used for candles, it's technically not a wax like all of the other waxes that we do use in candles. Now there's 3 main kinds of gel wax and they're all pretty similar, but they just come in different viscosities. So you've got low, medium and high. Low is generally used to create the sort of syrups that you pour over your candles for more of a runny effect to the candle. Medium is a pretty universal, well-rounded one. It's smack bang in the middle and you can use it for pretty much all the different effects you want to do with your gel wax. And it's generally the easiest one to come about. I find in Australia it's really hard to find all the different types. It's just a lot easier to get the medium gel wax. And then you've got your high viscosity wax, which is generally used for more of like the embeds that you add into your gel candles. So like if you're making a gel drink candle, the ice cubes would be made from a high density gel wax. Now all of the gel waxes, no matter where you buy them, are the same. The gel wax formula is patented, and so all the gel waxes that you buy are all coming from the same formula. They've just been licensed out to different companies to make it. So it really doesn't matter where you buy your gel wax, it's going to be the exact same. So if you buy it off Amazon, eBay or candle supply stores, it is all under the same patent, it's all the same formula. So generally I just recommend buying it from where you can get the best value for money. A really important thing to know about gel wax is it burns very hot. It's a lot hotter burning than soy wax or paraffin wax. So there are a few different steps and techniques that you need to do when you do work with a gel wax over the other kinds of waxes. First up, you want to be using a wick that can burn hot enough for your gel wax. Now when picking your wicks, you do need to go for a zinc core wick because they do burn a lot hotter than a cotton or paper wick. You also want to go 1 to 2 sizes up from a soy wax wick that you would normally use if you were using the same size container, or 1 size up from a paraffin wax. So if you already know that in this size container with your soy wax you use say a 16, then you might want to go to an 18 or a 20 because it does need to be bigger because the wax needs to burn at a higher temperature, so we need to have a stronger wick. When coloring gel wax, we do need to use a liquid candle dye because this is not a normal wax that we're using. You cannot use your wax dyes like this because they are paraffin based and generally don't work that great mixed in with the gel. So I'd only recommend using a liquid candle dye. When you do buy liquid candle dyes, they generally will say what kind of waxes that they do work with. So it's always good to just double check that to make sure it will work with a gel wax. And the same goes with fragrances. We need to really think about our fragrances. You need a fragrance with a high flash point because this gel wax has to be melted at a lot hotter than all of our other waxes. And a lot of fragrances do not have high enough flash points to work within gel wax. So if you are going to be just using it in a small part of your candle, I'd recommend not fragrancing it because it just makes it a lot more trickier, or making sure that you do have a fragrance with a very high flash point. Essential oils or any sort of fragrance that's got a flash point under 60 is not suitable for gel wax. Something to also think about when adding fragrance into gel wax can only hold 3% fragrant load. So if you are wanting candles that have a really strong scent and a really strong hot and cold fragrance, gel wax is not that kind of candle. Gel waxes are used for more of a decorative candle than necessarily a candle that's going to smell amazing. When I melt my gel wax, I don't use a double boiler method or a wax pot because your wax needs to get quite hot to melt. It has a lot higher point of melting than any other type of wax. So I will place this, instead of in a double boiler with my saucepan and some water, I can place this directly onto my stove top because if I do a double boiler method, it won't be able to get hot enough to melt my gel wax properly. So I'm going to be placing this directly onto my hot plate and melting it in a medium heat. We don't want to be putting it right up to the top as high as possible on our heat setting because you might end up smoking and burning your gel wax. Now, gel wax does take quite a while for it to actually melt down, but whatever you do, don't try to rush this process by turning it up to full to try to melt that wax faster. Gel wax just takes its time to melt, and we just want to melt it on a medium heat and get it up nice and hot. Now, depending on your gel wax, whether you're using low viscosity or high viscosity, will depend on how hot you do need to get it. So generally around 140 to 200 degrees for melting your gel wax, which is very hot, a lot hotter than obviously soy wax. So I'm going to keep checking my temperature. You definitely don't want to leave this wax melting, even though it will take probably about 20 minutes to fully melt down. You still want to be staying in the room because it will get quite hot quite fast when it does eventually start to melt down. So gel wax is mostly used as a decorative candle, and the wax will always be clear. Even when you do add some liquid dye in it, it's just going to tint the wax, but you're still going to have a translucent wax. Now, this is great because you can make some really cool and fun candles, and you can also add items into the wax because you're going to be able to see those items. Now, whatever items you add into your wax, please make sure that they're not flammable, because if you do ever decide to burn them, you will burn those items and you could increase your chance of a fire hazard because gel wax does burn quite hot. So you can add any items that you want in as long as they're not flammable, unless you're going to be doing the second technique that I'm showing you, where those items aren't actually going to be reaching the flame at all. But if you are going to be doing a gel wax candle where the wick is going to go the whole way down the center of that candle, then you need to make sure that the items that you're adding in do not have any potential of catching alight. With my gel wax, I always wear gloves when I handle it, just in case I've got any fragrance or any sort of moisturizers or residue on my hand. It might affect the way that the gel wax sets. It can also cause it, if you do have any of that, to go a little bit foggy. So I just like to wear gloves when I am handling it. I'm placing it into my pot and then putting it directly onto my heat source at a medium heat. Now, gel wax does take its time to melt down. It's a very slow wax to melt, because it does need to melt at a higher temperature than all of the other waxes. So there is that safety concern. Do not wander off. Just make sure you're around to watch it melt. So I'm going to put it about 3 onto my hot plate and just keep checking the temperature as I go through. For this one, we're going to be making a half and half gel wax candle and soy wax candle, and it's really cool because you can put whatever you really like in the bottom half of your gel wax candle. So I've got a large container here that I'm going to decorate the bottom, and the first one I did was with flowers. You could do crystals. This one I'm going to do as a sort of a soft little beachy theme. So I've got some white beach sand that I'm going to pour into the bottom of my container. And then I've also got some shells that I'm going to add on in. So I'm just going to start placing my shells however I want them. I've also got some crystal chips here, a little assortment, and I'm going to use these just to add a tiny bit of colour into my little beach scene. So just placing a few around. Just like that until I'm happy with my design. Now my wax is melting down and it's nearly ready to be poured. Now when we pour our wax, we're going to want to pour it in a slow and steady stream and not from too high above. If we pour really high above, we're going to create air bubbles. And air bubbles are the thing that we want to avoid the most when working with gel wax, unless we are making a gel wax candle that's a drink, because air bubbles in that are fine because it's going to look like it's a carbonated drink. But when we're doing other items that we don't necessarily want bubbles in, we want to go slow and steady and just pick one point to pour. You'll find with items that don't contain any oxygen, like stones, crystals, shells is going to be a lot easier to work with than if you do choose flowers. Flowers still look great and they're amazing, but they do contain oxygen, so when the gel is poured over, the oxygen has to escape from the flower and it does create bubbles. So I'd recommend when you first start off doing this, start off with a simpler design, something that is very easy to add on in. Like I have crystals here, I could do a little crystal one. Don't go straight into working with flowers because it's just that little bit more complicated. So my wax is at the right temperature, and please be careful because your gel wax will be really hot. Now normally I would like to tilt my candle to pour it in so that way I can pour it down the side, but obviously if I do that I'm going to change my design. So I'm just going to pick one point to pour. So I've just covered the top of my largest shell, and you can already notice the air bubbles are escaping from that shell because it was curled and obviously contained air. If I pour the whole way up to where I want my gel wax to go, it's going to be harder for those bubbles to come up. So by pouring a little bit and letting all of those bubbles come up to the surface, you're going to be able to get them out with a heat gun, or you can just pop them at the moment. But if you do your gel wax too deep, you're going to find it's a lot harder because your bubbles are going to get trapped halfway up in your wax because they have too far to travel. So I can get my skewer and I can start popping them. I can even bring them off to the edge. So this gel wax has now set, and I do have a few little bubbles. So if you do get a few little bubbles once the wax is set, there's a really simple trick that you can do just to get rid of those. And that is just to use a heat gun, just to melt that small area, allowing those air bubbles to pop up. And now that I've gotten those few air bubbles, I can then pour my second layer of gel wax down. So my second layer of gel is all set, and it's time to pour my soy candle on top. And the great thing about doing a candle this way is I don't have to be worried about anything flammable inside my gel, because the gel is not going to actually have a wick going through it, so none of this is going to end up being anywhere close to an open flame. So you can really put whatever you want inside your gel. Now I'm going to be using a wood wick for this one, and because it's gel I can just place it down and it's going to hold into its spot. I don't need to use a wick sticker. And now I can just pour my soy wax on top. My soy wax is only getting poured at 60 degrees, so there's no chance of melting in any of the gel because it's not going to get hot enough. So my soy wax is all ready to go. It's already at 60 degrees and it's got its fragrance added into it. And it's basically the exact same as what you would do if you were doing a normal container candle. There's no real difference to it except obviously the measurement of wax, because we're only filling about halfway of our container up. I've also got my wood wick candle here because we're not actually burning the gel wax at all, because the wick will stop when it reaches the wax. So I don't need to worry about using like a zinc coil wax because I'm not trying to burn my gel at all. So all I'm going to do is pour this on top, and I don't have to worry about the gel melting because the gel needs to get a lot hotter than my soy wax is right now for it to melt. And then all I need to do now is just let that sit, and I have got a really cool candle that combines gel wax and soy wax together. For this one, I'm going to be pouring my gel wax on top of my embeds and my soy wax candle. So I do need to pour it a little bit cooler than what I would normally pour it, just because I don't want to have my embeds melting, because obviously these are soy wax, they melt at a lot lower temperature than a gel wax. I've added some color in using my liquid colors, which I find work the best when working with gel wax. Now because I did mix that through, I now do have bubbles through this gel wax. It's very hard not to get bubbles when you do have to mix it with the color, and because I've left this to cool down. So this is about around 80 degrees right now, and the longer you leave it to cool down, the more bubbly it's going to get when you pour it. If you do find it does start to cool down a bit too much, you can use your heat gun to warm it up slightly. But if I was to pour this at its perfect temperature, I'm probably going to end up melting these a little bit. So I'm just going to give these a pour out. And this is meant to look like sort of like a syrupy glaze that you would see on a dessert. So just to smooth that glaze out, I've given it a really quick burst of heat. We want to be really careful that we're not going to overdo it and melt our embeds. And just like that, our dessert candle is done. It's like a strawberry sort of like cheesecake or whatever you want to call it. But I think it looks pretty cool, and it's pretty simple to do, but it's really effective.